Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1991 live-action anime adaptation, The Guyver. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out to Matthew for requesting this review. If there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below. Now, The Guyver is one of those films that I used to love growing up. I watched this film all the time on VHS as a kid. I would rent it whenever I had a chance from the local video store. When it was released on DVD, it was one of the first few DVDs I remember buying. And it's a film that I still have a lot of appreciation for, despite so many fucking issues that I have with this movie because of the nostalgia that I have for this film. That being said, this film kind of sucks. And it pains me to admit that, but it's true. It's not really a good movie. It's got good elements. There are some things about it that are really fantastic. For instance, the practical makeup effects by Screaming Mad George. And it is a very unique, wild, weird movie that, in a lot of ways, is not like most films of its genre. And Mark Hamill is really good. And I don't mind some elements of the score. And David Gale is a absolute blast to watch, playing this scenery chewing villain. But that doesn't mean that this is a good movie. The film was only made because New Line and the producers wanted to cash in on the success of the Ninja Turtles films. The live action Ninja Turtles films were a surprise hit for New Line, and they were scrambling for anything that could potentially bring them the same amount of cash flow. And they were able to get the rights to Bio Booster Armor Guyver, which was a manga anime, and got it pretty cheap. So then they were able to adapt it, get a budget of like 3 million, and hope and pray that they've got another franchise. But that did not happen because the film didn't do well when it was released in theaters, which I don't even think it really got much of a theatrical release to begin with. I think it did decent on home video because that's the only reason why there was a sequel made in the first place, because it must have done somewhat well. The advertising is just unbelievably misleading. I mean, it makes it seem as if Mark Hamill is the Guyver, but he's not. It's some wimpy Jim Carrey wannabe who might as well be called Tim Terry because he looks so much like Jim Carrey. Like, this guy could have honestly been a fucking stunt double for Jim Carrey throughout Jim's career because he's such a dead ringer for Jim. So you got Tim Terry instead, who plays the Guyver and not Mark Hamill. Because there, other than Mark Hamill, and maybe some horror genre cult favorites like David Gale and um, Jeffrey Combs, who has a little cameo role, or Michael Berryman, who plays the villain Lisker. There really isn't any other stars that you could really market the film for. I mean, what? You're going to market the film for Jimmie Walker from What's Happening? Or is it Good Times? I think it was What's Happening. I think that's what it was. It could have been Good Times. I think it probably was Good Times. I'm not too familiar with those two sitcoms from the 70s. But Jimmie Walker was a well-known somewhat celebrity in the 70s, like a C-list celebrity for playing a character who was well known for saying dynamite. That was his big claim to fame. And do you and yeah, he does say that line at the end of the movie because it's Jimmie Walker. That's the only thing he's known for is dynamite. And it's fitting because I wanted to blow his character up with a stick of dynamite in this movie because that character was so fucking irritating. But I'll get to that later. But yeah, the film was clearly made to try to capitalize on the Ninja Turtles. I mean, there's even a line of dialogue where Mark Hamill's cop character, his boss tells him to, I think he says like, "Oh, stop looking for Ninja Turtles," or what? It's some kind of thing like that. He mentions how he's been looking for Ninja Turtles, or so, and it's like, really, like you, that's so on the nose that it's honestly kind of unbelievable. And there's even a reference to RoboCop too, because RoboCop was popular with the intended audience for this film at the time. So, yeah, the thing is though, even though it was put on the fast track to capitalize on that success of the Ninja Turtles franchise, there really isn't much about this film that you could say is similar to the Ninja Turtles, other than maybe there are some monsters and there's some martial arts and mutants. But that's it. There really isn't much of a connection other than that. The film is directed by two different directors. You have the makeup effects artist, Screaming Mad George, who did the makeup for the film, and Steve Wang, who would go on to direct Guyver 2, Dark Hero. And as a result, the film's direction is very split. You can tell that this is directed by two different people. There's a lot of sequences that really do have this look and vibe and tone that's very different than the others. And in some ways, that has to do with the film's script, but in other ways, it has to do with the way the film looks visually, or the way that certain scenes are blocked, or the way that the director moves with the camera or shoots certain scenes. It is honestly kind of a clusterfuck because you're like, okay, I can kind of tell that this was directed by Screaming Mad George because of the emphasis and the way that things are shot with the makeup effects. And then the other stuff, I can kind of tell that it's done by Steve Wang because he has a similar emphasis on that, but he has a different kind of style. So it's just one of those things where it really has this very divided direction. And I don't know why it was directed by two people. It should have been directed by either Steve Wang solely by himself, because he showed in Guyver 2 that he can handle that and do remarkably well, even with a low budget, or Screaming Mad George. Like, just pick a director. Why do you have two people directing this movie? And then with the screenplay by John Purdy, this script, from the very beginning of the movie, it starts off the wrong way. Because it starts off with a text crawl that is just useless exposition for dummies. Because later on in the film, there are moments where the same exposition is explained to the audience again in lines of dialogue. So it's not even needed. You don't need a text crawl with narration to start the movie explaining all this backstory and exposition about the Zoonoids and the Guyver unit when all of that is explained later on in the film anyway. Like, why was that there? So that's not a good way to start the movie. It's very fractured and just off. And then once the movie finally does start, like, you've got these admittedly really impressive looking makeup effects designs by Screaming Mad George of these zoonoids, and they kill this guy scientist who turns into a fish monster, and it's actually pretty bloody because they crush his head. Like, there's a fair amount of blood in this, and I was honestly pretty surprised by that for a PG-13 film that was marketed heavily towards young audiences and teenagers at the time. So yeah, you have this brutal murder, really, to start the movie. They have this goofy Karate Kid knockoff bullshit with Sean Armstrong, our hero, who's a wimp, who is just getting his ass kicked at karate class, saying this is just like the worst way to introduce your so-called hero, your protagonist, because he comes across as a limp dick. He comes across as a wimp, a total fucking loser. He even does the same shit that, a kid would do who's being bullied in a movie, who is at karate class and is getting their ass handed to them, and they're all like, "I wasn't ready." Like, he even does that. Just like, "I wasn't ready, butthead." You're just like, really? This is your hero? This is the guy who you could see somebody beating him up for his lunch money in a high school movie. What the hell is this shit? Why? He's the hero. This is the guy who's gonna be the Guyver. Great. So you have that Sean Armstrong. The way he's written is just terrible. He comes across as a total loser. So when he gets the Guyver unit and he becomes this superhero, like it doesn't really have the impact that it really should have, because if it had a character who was strong and wasn't a total wimp and had some genuine charisma or something about him that really made you like this guy, then you would have a likable hero. But instead, you just don't really get that. And then when he does become the Guyver, it's just a really weird, poorly put together and written sequence, because of the fact that it's too goofy, it's too silly with the gang members and the guy who's trying to attack him with fucking nunchucks or some shit and a knife, and he can't do shit, and he just drops it because he's a total goof. And it doesn't help either that, for the most part, a lot of the time when you have the Guyver, when you have Sean and he's in the suit, he's just doing a lot of judo throwing. He's just judo tossing people or doing like karate blocks. I mean, there are some moments later on in the film during a few of the fight scenes where there is better choreography, where the Guyver will do some flips, or he'll do some kicks, or he'll actually throw some punches, and those are actually pretty fun to watch. But prior to that, he's just doing these fucking throws. He's going like this in this fucking pose. He's like striking a pose like he's gonna, like, I don't know, like he's gonna do Vogue or some shit. I half expect Madonna to show up in the background. Strike a pose. So he's just doing these fucking poses and shit. It's fitting because he's a fucking poser. So yeah, he's doing these poses, judo tossing, which sucks. You have this romance with Mitski or whatever the fuck. I don't. Her name is escaping me because it's Mizuki. Okay, it's Mizuki. I thought it was Miski. I could have sworn that he kept calling her Miski. Regardless, this character is equally as poorly written as a lot of the other characters. The romance between the two is tepid and just terrible. Like, you don't really care about the dynamic between the two, and that just hurts the film a lot. The movie actually does maintain your interest somewhat when it's focusing on Mark Hamill's character. When it's focusing on his character getting involved in the investigation, trying to figure out what's going on with the Kronos Corporation and the Guyver unit, the film is actually legitimately interesting when you have Max Reed being the focus of it. But when it's limp dick loser, dickweed, Sean Armstrong, who looks like Jim Carrey's doppelganger, it doesn't really hold up as well. The same goes for when it's focusing on his girlfriend. And the humor in this film is just horrible. It's cringe inducing. It's not funny in the slightest. I don't know what they were doing here. I don't know what the writers were thinking. I mean, you got scenes where there's a Zoonoid played by Jimmie Walker who's just rapping, and the rapping is just the kind of rapping that's just really lazy and lame beyond belief. And he just is constantly rapping all the time, and you're just wanting to just wrap his fucking lips in duct tape so he would shut the fuck up and stop rapping because it's not entertaining. It's just fucking annoying. And Michael Berryman, I mean, the design of Lisker is badass, but what Lisker does is not really as badass as it should be. It's kind of just another one of the bumbling henchmen of David Gale's villainous character, uh, Balkus. And yeah, you have the comedy which sticks out like a sore thumb and is not funny. It's too cartoonish, it's too goofy, and it's a big reason why the tone of the film is so bad and so inconsistent. I mean, this is the same movie that has a genuinely horrifying body horror sequence where Mark Hamill's character Max turns into an insect. Like it's right up there with shit you would see in David Cronenberg's The Fly. I'm not shitting you. Like that scene still makes me turn away because of how just gross and unsettling it is. And then you got fucking cartoon sound effects and clown monsters and shitty rapping and you got a sequence where the Guyver, which there was a scene where Sean, while he's in the suit, gets defeated by the Zoonoids, and they rip the Guyver uh, unit out of his head, and then he dissolves. And Jeffrey Combs's Zoonoid character eats the thing, and then the Guyver cuts out of his body, which is a really cool way for a hero to make their reemergence, to rise up out of the body of a Zoonoid. That's pretty awesome, and it's a pretty cool image when you do see it. But it's set up poorly because you have a stupid, unnecessary Jaws parody. Because the Guyver has a razor blade on his elbow, and he pokes through the stomach of the creature, and it's sliding through the stomach, and you got dun 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 dun. It's like, why the fuck are we doing this? What is this, a parody? Is this a joke now? Is this film a comedy now? What are we doing? Why does this film have the vibe and tone of a trauma movie? What the fuck? And it's just so frustrating because it's such a waste of so many legitimately solid elements. The idea of the Guyver as a live action film is something that you could have a lot of fun with. That could be really exciting and fun. I mean, prime example is Guyver 2. That's an exciting and fun movie. It's got some flaws as well, but nowhere near as many as this movie. And that's a testament to how terrific that idea is and how it can actually work in live action. But this, I don't know if they were not sold on it or they were trying to make it too uh, similar to Ninja Turtles in tone to appeal to a certain audience. I don't know what is going on here. I don't know why they went with that tone. And the action, when it is there, other than a few legitimately fun fights, specifically the Guyver's final fight with Lisker at the Kronos complex, where he really does fuck him up. Like, he just bashes in his fucking knee, rips his head open. That was a legitimately fun action sequence. And even the battle with the Guyver versus the uh, big bad Ultra Zoonoid, Balkus, which I know it's not called the Ultra Zoonoid. I forgot exactly what the name of it was, but it that was fun too because it was a really impressive practical effect. It was a big life-size monster model that they used. I mean, not monster model, it was a monster mechanical effect, and it was really cool. And it just is so frustrating because I love the Guyver. Even the look of the suit is really nice. They did a good job. It's pretty awesome. It's like the first time when you see the Guyver suit in live action, it's a pretty badass sight. It really is. It's awesome. It's one of those things you're like, wow, that's really cool. And then he just does lame judo throws and throws people into boxes and shit. And you're just like, what? So it doesn't even do as much with that as it could. And the performances by most of the cast are just awful, just atrocious. Your lead is a guy who pretty much didn't do much of anything, and you can see why. His girlfriend is so bad and so stilted with her acting that it's laughable. I mean, the best performers in a lot of ways are the villains or Mark Hamill, and then Mark Hamill just doesn't really have much to do, especially in the climax because he's just running away from these monsters, and then he turns into a bug. So just a fucking waste of Mark Hamill too. So yeah, the script is just a mess. Doesn't do a good job establishing the characters, doesn't do a good job making you invested in the story or making you really like the lead and really become a fan of the hero. I mean, might as well have had Mark Hamill be the Guyver then. Because Mark Hamill is definitely a better actor than Jack Armstrong. And speaking of Jack Armstrong, might as well talk about the cast, which is not very strong, and it starts with Jack Armstrong. He sucks. Like I said, he's a poor man's Jim Carrey. He honestly should have just been Jim Carrey's stunt double for the rest of his career. He probably would have been paid handsomely as well. I mean, this guy has no on-screen presence. He has the on-screen presence of a wet sock. Mark Hamill, he's trying so hard. He does the best he can with what little he has to work with. And I got to give him a lot of kudos for that. Vivian Wu as Mizuki, like I said, really stilted, really pathetic performance. I mean, there are so many lines of dialogue where it's just really bad and hard to sit through. I don't know anything. That's actually her acting in the in the film. I don't know anything. Sean, no, Sean, nice. David Gale, he's only in it for like a few scenes, and every scene that he's in, he almost steals the movie because he's just so over the top. But you love it because he's just really having the time of his life playing this villain. I wanted to see more scenes of him because he was so entertaining to watch. Michael Berryman, and he does what he can, but he doesn't have much. He's pretty much the guy who has to deal with Jimmie Walker's just absolutely pathetic and just atrocious comedic. I can't even fucking say comedic relief because I'm so goddamn irritated by that character. I can't even speak straight. He's wasted because he's just playing babysitter to stupid comic relief characters like MC Stryker, played by Jimmie Walker, who needed to blow himself up and get himself out of this fucking movie. There were times in this film where it seemed like they thought that he was the star. And I'm like, why? He sucks. Just like pretty much everyone else in this film, not named Mark Hamill and David Gale. Peter Spellos, the guy says nothing. He looks like a fatter version of Vernon Wells in Commando, and he says nothing. He's mute for the entire movie. Useless. Spice Williams, who you might recognize, she was, I think, a Klingon in Star Trek 5. She's in this. She's serviceable. At least she and Michael Berryman have some kind of chemistry, but she admittedly doesn't really do a whole lot, and the design for her transformation is really lame. And speaking of the transformations, some of the transformations for the Zoonoids is impressive. Some of them are really cool. Lisker, I would say the scientist who turns to Sagawa, who turns into the fish monster, um, Balkus's final form. But there's other ones that just seem like they just put together whatever the hell they had left in the uh, shop at the time. Uh, and then there was another one though, was like a bug creature, and that one actually I thought was a better looking design than than any of the ones that they went with for the other two henchmen. I mean, MC Striker is okay. He honestly looks like a big giant gremlin to the point where honestly I think Amblin should have thought about suing. But yeah, he looks like a massive giant bipedal gremlin. But then there's this other guy, Ramsey, who's like some kind of monster with an elephant trunk for a nose, and it was just weird and honestly pretty dumb looking. And then you have Spice Williams's character. She turns into what is just a fluffy, fuzzy looking troll thing with hairy tits. It was just a really bad design. And you have Linnea Quigley, who plays a Scream Queen in a cameo, which is honestly a fun sequence. And that was like one of the only times I laughed was in that scene because I thought it was actually kind of a clever little bit of parody or satire by having MC Stryker show up on a film set, and Linnea Quigley act as if he's the monster for the movie, but then he steps on her lines, and then she gets mad at him. Like that actually made me chuckle. But that was like one of the few laughs I had in the entire movie. And yeah, it's fun to see Jeffrey Combs as Dr. East. Get it? Because, Dr. West from Reanimator, but this time he's Dr. East. But yeah, the cast for the most part, though, not very strong. And the cinematography by Levi Isaacs, it's just okay, serviceable. The editing by Andy Horvitch and Joe Wu Jr., though, God, I hated the way this film was edited. Like, the way this film was edited gave me a fucking headache. This film had way too many unnecessary, stupid transitions that were always the same. There was no variety to them. Like, if you're going to have comic book style transitions, then switch them up. Don't have the same lightning bolt transition followed by the same sound effect. Because after like the second time around, it's no longer clever. It's no longer anything that really adds to the movie. It just detracts from the film. It makes the movie worse because it just makes a movie that's already too unfocused and irritating and annoying with its really corny, cheesy humor. And then on top of that, you've got lightning bolt transitions and which honestly makes it sound like you're playing a shitty Tiger Electronic game of the Guyver. Because it really does give off that kind of vibe. I'm like, oh shit, I'm stuck playing this piece of shit Tiger Electronics game when I could actually be playing the Super Nintendo or something worth a shit. I mean, what were they thinking with those fucking transitions? And they happen way too often too. There are times where you will have like 3 transitions in the span of like 5 minutes. What the fuck? So yeah, the editing for the most part is pretty egregious. The music by Matthew Morse, there are times where the music's actually good. I like the main theme. But then there's other times where it's trying to be more campy, trying to be more silly, and I don't like that. I don't like that music. But like the main theme, I like. When it's taking itself more seriously with the score, it's good. When it's doing the opposite and it's trying to be goofy or dumb, it's not good. It's bad. It's a bad score. It's a shitty score when it's doing that. It's just a film that you're like, there are so many things that can make this a fun B movie, a fun midnight film. Have better fight scenes, have better action sequences, recast the lead. Fuck it, just have Mark Hamill be the Guyver. He could. You can't tell me he couldn't be. I mean, he went through all that makeup for the bug transformation. He could do the same with the Guyver. And you have a lot of people that are just playing the Guyver in the suit anyway. Give David Gale more screen time to chew up the scenery and tone down the humor considerably. I mean, you can have Jimmie Walker if you want, but don't have him try to take over the film and try to be the star and try to be the main attraction because he's awful and he's not funny. And make it rated R. The anime was gory as hell, and so was the manga. Having it be PG-13 was just weird. And that's another reason why the tone sticks out even more. Is because it's PG-13, and there's some stuff that's clearly intended to be for kids, with the cartoon sound effects and shit, and then you've got, like, Mark Hamill turning into a fucking insect, and gory violence. So, yeah, I don't really know what else to say about the Guyver, except it's one of those movies that I will always have a special place in my heart for, despite how disappointing it is to me as an adult. And it's a film that I would recommend if you like creature features and monster bashers, because when you have the sequences where the Guyver is fighting zoonoids, it's fun. But that does not make up for all of the other fuck ups in this film. It just doesn't. Uh, and I also want to give Arrow. I want to give Arrow credit. This is a good release. I mean, the film has a good looking transfer. I mean, if you are a fan of the movie, or even just somewhat of a fan of the film, it's worth picking up the Blu-ray just to see Screaming Mad George's spectacular makeup effects in HD. Um, and there's like a little interview with Brian Yuzna, which was all right. Nothing that extensive when it comes to features, but there's enough there if you're a fan. This is one of those films that just falls in the same category as shit like the live action Street Fighter movie or Double Dragon. That's really where it falls for me. Like films that I grew up with, I can still kind of watch as an adult, but they have too many cringe inducing moments in them to make them good, to make them even average, and make it something that I would want to watch over and over again, let alone anytime soon. Because there's just too many things about it that suck. So, yeah, that's my thoughts on The Guyver. Thanks for watching my review, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.